I never thought the day would come when my own son would raise his hand against me. Yet there I stood in my living room, feeling the sting on my cheek and the deeper sting in my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't fight back. I simply walked away. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. You may hear my story and find a trace of your own in it. I spent most of that afternoon in my kitchen, rinsing dishes that didn't need to be washed and wiping a counter that was already clean. That's something I do whenever my mind can't stay still. At 68, I've learned that silence can be a kind of shelter, even inside your own home. My house in West End isn't big, but it's held my family's life for more than 4 decades. The walls have heard every kind of laughter, and more than a few arguments. Still, nothing in all those years prepared me for the sound that eventually cut through that day. Derek walked in without knocking, same as always. His keys jingled in a sharp, impatient rhythm. He tossed his backpack on the couch, muttering something under his breath. I didn't catch the exact words, but the tone was enough. Lately, every syllable out of him carried a kind of edge, like he was tired of pretending he respected me. He opened the fridge, grabbed the last soda, cracked it open, and drank it halfway before he even shut the door. "You didn't buy any more?" His question wasn't a question. It was a complaint dressed up as conversation. I dried my hands on a towel and kept my voice steady. "I bought groceries 2 days ago. You were here. You saw them." He shrugged, took another long sip, and crushed the can with one hand. He didn't throw it away, just set it on the table, as if I were supposed to take care of it. Over the past year, these small moments had stacked up like old newspapers in a corner. A heavy pile of disrespect that I kept stepping around because he's my son. He leaned against the counter and stared at me. "We need to talk about that house paperwork again." My stomach tightened. He'd brought it up 3 times that week, always with that same impatient posture, hands on hips, shoulders pulled back as if he were preparing to negotiate a business deal instead of speaking to his father. "I told you, Derek, I'm not signing anything." He let out a short, humorless laugh, like he was dealing with someone who didn't understand simple instructions. "You're being stubborn for no reason. It's just paperwork, a transfer. It makes everything easier later." Easier for him, he meant, not for me. I walked over to the sink to rinse a cup, but he followed, stepping too close, that soda on his breath mixing with anger. He had my wife's eyes, wide and sharp, though hers had always been gentle. I wondered what she would have said if she'd been standing in that kitchen. Probably something about patience, or maybe a reminder that love shouldn't feel like a battlefield. But love wasn't helping me then. "You're retired, Dad. You can barely keep up with maintenance around here. If something happens, I'd be the one dealing with it. So why not get ahead of it?" He tried to sound reasonable. The words didn't match the look in his eyes. "I still manage my house just fine," I said. He scoffed again. "Barely." That one word cut deeper than I expected. Barely. Like I was fading, like I wasn't capable anymore. I let out a slow breath and stepped away, trying to keep the tension from climbing higher. Derek had always been quick-tempered, even as a kid. After his mother died, I tried to fill every role. Father, mother, steady hand holding things together. I worried maybe I'd held too much for too long. "Derek, let's drop it for today," I said, hoping the conversation could slip into a quieter corner.
But he stayed right there, eyes narrowing. You think this is going away? You think you can just ignore it like everything else? You need to stop pretending you can handle life alone. My hand tightened around the cup I was drying. I felt the sting of that suggestion, the insult tucked inside it. Alone, as if years of raising him didn't count for anything. I'm not signing away my house, I said. Not today, not ever. He took a step closer, voice rising. This is ridiculous. You're impossible. Why do you have to make everything so damn hard? Lower your voice, I told him. But he didn't. The volume climbed, and when I tried to walk past him, he grabbed my arm. Not rough, but firm, as if he wanted to keep me still until he got what he wanted. That grip tightened something deep in my chest. I pulled away. Let go. He didn't move. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe frustration, maybe the build-up of every expectation he thought I owed him. Then his hand shot up in a fast, careless motion. The slap landed flat across my cheek, a sound that didn't belong in that house, a sound I could feel in my bones. It wasn't the force that shook me, but the fact that he'd done it at all. I didn't stagger backward. I just went still. My breath came shallow. My hand hovered near my cheek, but I didn't touch it. I didn't want to give the moment any more weight than it already carried. Derek froze too, as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. Then his expression hardened, like he'd convinced himself it wasn't that serious. If you just listen, he muttered. My jaw clenched. Not from anger, surprisingly, but from something more hollow, like a fragile piece of dignity inside me had cracked. I walked past him without saying another word. His voice followed me, sharp and irritated, but I didn't respond. I stepped into the hallway, each footstep quieter than the last. The living room looked smaller than usual, stuffed with old memories that suddenly felt heavier than the furniture. Outside, the late day light had softened. The air held that faint warmth that Atlanta gets at the end of summer, the kind that soaks into your shirt and lingers. I stood in the yard, breathing slowly, letting the hum of distant traffic settle around me. My cheek was still warm, but it wasn't the physical burn that troubled me. It was the echo of something deeper, something that had been building for years without a name. I walked toward the back of the yard where the grass thins out near the fence. My steps felt strange, as if each one were revealing a truth I had tried to hide from myself. The neighbour's dog barked, then stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that stretched longer than usual. That silence pressed against me, not comforting like before, but heavy, as if it were demanding I see something I'd been refusing to face. I leaned against the old oak tree that's been there longer than the house itself. The rough bark pressed into my palm. That familiar texture steadied me a little, but it didn't erase the question rising inside me, the one I'd never allowed to surface, because fathers aren't supposed to think that way about their sons. Somewhere behind me, the back door creaked. I didn't turn around. I didn't want another word, another demand, another reminder of what had just happened. I listened for footsteps, but heard none. Maybe he was watching from the doorway. Maybe he'd gone back inside. I didn't check. A breeze moved through the yard, brushing my sleeve. I looked down at my hand and noticed it trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a tiredness that went far beyond the body. A tiredness of carrying too much for too long,
with too little given back. The sun dipped lower and the yard grew dimmer. The shadows stretched out, merging near my feet until they looked like they could swallow the entire lawn. I pushed myself off the tree and walked along the fence line, tracing the familiar worn patch where I used to fix the boards myself. Halfway across the yard, I stopped. A soft sound escaped me. Not a sigh, not a groan, just a quiet exhale I didn't realize I'd been holding. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and stared at the house, the windows reflecting the last bit of daylight. I loved that house. I built my life inside those walls. I taught Derek to ride a bike in that driveway. I patched the roof myself after a storm. I carried my wife across the threshold the day we bought it. And somehow, in the space of one argument, it felt as if the place was slipping away from me. I didn't want to go back inside. Not yet. So I walked farther down the yard, past the shed, past the clothesline I rarely used anymore. My shoulder brushed a branch as I passed, scattering a few dry leaves to the ground. They fell without sound. The longer I stayed out there, the clearer something became. Not a decision, not a plan, but a shift. A slow, steady shift in the air around me, inside me. As if a door had creaked open in a room I'd kept sealed. The back porch light flicked on behind me. I didn't turn, I just kept moving, letting the quiet stretch between the house and where I stood. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask permission or forgiveness. I stepped onto the narrow dirt path that runs behind the yard, brushing my fingers against the fence as I walked. The wood felt worn, the slats uneven. My hand drifted along that rough line until it stopped on a broken corner. I let it rest there for a moment, steadying myself before taking another step. And another. I stayed outside longer than I meant to, letting the yard swallow the noise I didn't want to face. The back door finally slammed, sharp enough to tell me Derek had retreated somewhere inside. I walked toward the porch with no intention of talking to him again that night. My hand brushed the railing as I stepped up, and the rough wood steadied me in a way my thoughts couldn't. Inside, the house felt colder than the air outdoors. Not a physical chill, more like the kind that settles around you when trust has been cracked open. A faint shuffle drifted in from the living room, followed by the scrape of something being moved. I didn't go check. Whatever Derek was doing, I didn't want to stand near him long enough to find out. As I passed the front window, a shadow moved on the sidewalk. Two neighbors slowed their pace, whispering to each other while glancing toward the house. Maybe they'd heard raised voices. Maybe they caught the moment I walked out with my jaw tight and my cheek red. Their eyes lingered too long, and something inside me tightened. Shame has a strange way of creeping into your bones, even when you haven't done anything wrong. I headed to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and avoided the mirror. A man can look at his own reflection and see too much. Instead, I dried my hands, turned off the light, and found a chair at the far end of the dining room, a place where I could sit without hearing Derek move around. The quiet stretched, filling the house like smoke. I never knew silence could make a place feel overcrowded, Part of me wanted to pretend nothing had happened. I've done that before, smoothed over moments, swallowed hard words, convinced myself peace was worth more than pride. Another part wouldn't sit still. That side reminded me of my wife, who never let disrespect take root. She taught me that kindness has limits, boundaries that protect the heart behind it. I wondered what she would say if she'd seen the way Derek's hand struck my face. Sometime before midnight, I heard him go into his room and shut the door. The lock clicked, a small sound, but one that carried too much meaning in a house that used to be ours, not his alone. I exhaled, long and slow. My cheek had stopped burning, but the deeper ache still pulsed. Morning came without an alarm. I hadn't slept well, though I must have dozed here and there. The church bells from St. Paul AME drifted through the neighbourhood, steady as always. I dressed and left before Derek woke up, not wanting another conversation that would lead nowhere. St. Paul sits only a few blocks away, a brick building with steps worn down by decades of Sundays. People gathered near the entrance, greeting each other with easy warmth. I usually enjoyed that, but today I felt outside of everything, as if I were walking through someone else's life. Inside, the choir rehearsed softly while folks settled into their pews. I took my usual seat near the middle. My hands wouldn't stay still, so I folded them together and wedged them between my knees. The pastor hadn't even begun speaking when a familiar voice whispered beside me. "Ray, you all right?" Lorraine eased into the seat next to mine. She'd known me and my wife since our early years in this neighbourhood. She didn't smile, didn't try to joke, just studied my face the way a teacher studies a troubled student. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, but concern. "I'm fine," I told her. She didn't move. "Try again." I swallowed. She had always been able to see through the first answer. "Rough night, that's all." Lorraine placed a gentle hand on my forearm, her fingers warm against skin that felt colder than usual. "You came in here looking like a man carrying something too heavy. You don't have to name it, but don't pretend it's not there." Her words slipped under my ribs. I glanced at her, then away. The choir's voices rose behind us, soft and steady, and for a moment the church felt like the only place where I didn't have to brace myself. The rain waited, patient as ever. "I just need some space to think," I finally said. She nodded. "Thinking's good, but don't confuse silence with strength. Sometimes silence is just a wound trying to hide." I looked down at my hands. The skin across my knuckles tightened as my fingers curled. She didn't need to know the details to sense that something had cracked open in my home. "You're not alone," she added, "even when you feel like you are." Her voice held no pity, only truth. It reached places inside me I hadn't touched in years. The kind of places a father ignores when he's trying to hold a family together, even when the seams are fraying. The pastor stepped up to begin the service. People around us adjusted their posture, straightened their ties, opened their hymnals. Lorraine withdrew her hand, but stayed close enough that I could feel her presence anchoring me. I tried to follow the sermon, but my mind kept drifting back to the slap, its sound, the sudden sting, the look on Derek's face right after. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. Something that didn't belong between father and son. A quiet shiver moved through me, though no draft touched my skin. When the service ended, everyone filed out slowly, stopping to chat on the steps. Lorraine walked with me a few paces before pausing. "Ray, whatever whatever line got crossed, don't let it disappear under old habits. Some things don't fix themselves. I nodded, but didn't answer. Words felt too fragile at that moment. She squeezed my arm once more and headed toward her car, leaving me standing near the sidewalk, surrounded by familiar buildings that somehow felt different today. I turned toward home, the weight inside me shifting again, refusing to settle, nudging me forward with a quiet insistence I couldn't quite name as I stepped back onto the street. Walking back from church that Sunday, I noticed two men near the corner store pause their conversation as I approached. They lowered their voices, glancing in my direction with that quick flick of curiosity people use when they think they're being discreet. I didn't slow down, but something in the way their heads tilted made my chest tighten. By the time I reached my block, a woman from 3 houses down offered a strained half-smile, then leaned toward another neighbour as soon as I passed. Their murmurs scratched at my back like gravel rolled across concrete. I kept moving. People talk, that's nothing new. Still, each sideways glance landed heavier than the last. I didn't know what version of events Derek had allowed to spill into the street, but the tone of those whispers told me I wasn't the one they believed. A father causing trouble for his son. That's how rumours grow. Small seeds planted quietly, watered by misunderstanding. Inside the house, Derek's door stood slightly ajar. The scent of his cologne drifted down the hallway. I could tell he had stepped out recently because the television was still humming faintly through his bedroom wall. A stack of envelopes sat on the dining table. Bills, notices, and a few personal letters, all of them unopened. My name was printed on each one, yet none had been placed in my hands. I lifted one envelope and turned it over. The flap had already been loosened. Derek must have checked the mail earlier and helped himself to whatever arrived. When I went to place the envelope back, I saw my room key hanging from a hook near his door instead of mine. A strange tightness pulled at the center of my chest. That key had always stayed on a hook in the kitchen. Now it hung where only Derek had access. I didn't confront him that day. Instead, I walked to my bedroom, checked my drawers, and found 2 items slightly shifted out of place: my medical insurance card and my passport. Not stolen, just disturbed. A quiet intrusion masked as concern. The house felt different with those discoveries. Smaller somehow, like the space around me had shrunk without permission. Every door seemed to lean inward. Every wall held its breath. Later that afternoon, while standing by the back window, I heard 2 young neighbours outside chatting with someone whose voice I recognized too well. Derek. His tone carried certainty, as if he were laying out a story he wanted others to repeat. I couldn't hear every word, but phrases drifted through the open gap. Confused lately, hard to deal with, doesn't remember things right. Not the truth, not even close. I stepped away from the window before he noticed the curtain move. My hands felt hot, almost buzzing. The idea that my own son would choose strangers as witnesses to a narrative that painted me weak, that struck deeper than the slap. In the kitchen, I opened a drawer and pulled out a small spiral notebook I used to jot down grocery lists. I tore out the old pages and started writing dates, times, and snippets of recent arguments. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping sideways. I noted when Derek raised his voice. I noted when he blocked me from entering my own bedroom to look for something. I noted the moment he removed the house keys from their usual spot and didn't give them back. The pen dug into the paper harder with each entry. As the days moved forward, the pattern grew clearer. Letters never reached my hands unless he brought them. Packages delivered to the porch vanished before I could check. He controlled the mailbox entirely, insisting he'd take care of it, though I never asked him to. Each intrusion seemed small enough alone, but together they built a wall I hadn't realized I'd been cornered behind. One evening, after Derek stepped out with his girlfriend, I went into the hall closet and pulled down an old shoebox. Inside were receipts from decades past. Home repairs, birthday dinners, car maintenance. I sifted through them until I found the slip for a tiny security camera I'd bought years ago but never used. Memory told me it still worked. A man doesn't usually need surveillance in his own living room, but the ground beneath me no longer felt steady. I found the device, dusted it off, and tested it in the kitchen while the refrigerator hummed its steady rhythm. The little light blinked from the back. Still alive. Setting it up took a few minutes. I placed it high on a bookshelf in the living room, angled just enough to capture the space where most confrontations happened. That corner had seen more raised voices in the last year than I cared to admit. I steadied my hands as I adjusted the camera, not out of fear, but from the sheer weight of what it meant to be doing this. When the image came through clearly on my phone, a long breath left me. Not relief, more like acknowledgement. I wasn't imagining the shift in this house. I wasn't imagining the tension, the control, the way my life felt quietly rearranged by someone who once depended on me for everything. After the camera was set, I returned to the kitchen to make tea. The kettle clicked as it heated. I leaned against the counter, my fingers tapping lightly against the wood, as thoughts churned without structure. The house creaked once, settling into its nightly rest. The sound used to comfort me. Tonight, it felt like the place itself was watching, waiting for me to understand something I'd been avoiding. The kettle whistled softly. I poured the water over a tea bag and watched the swirl of colour bloom in the cup. Steam rose and brushed my face as I lifted it. My cheek, the one Derek struck, no longer hurt, but now and then a faint throb returned, as if my skin remembered the moment better than my mind wanted to. I carried the cup into the dining room and set it down beside my notebook. The pages fluttered when I sat, catching a slight breeze from the vent overhead. I smoothed them with my palm, then added one more line about the mail, one more note about the key, one more thought I didn't want to lose track of. Outside, a car door shut. Someone laughed. A screen door slammed down the street. Life moved on as usual, but the shape of my days had changed in ways only I seemed to notice. I lifted my cup again and took a slow sip, letting the warmth move through me while the house settled into its quiet routines. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, where Derek's door stayed slightly open, a sliver of darkness stretching across the floor like it belonged there. My hand rested on the notebook, pen waiting, as the next entry pressed at the edge of my thoughts. Derek came home late the next afternoon with his girlfriend trailing behind him. Her perfume reached the hallway before she did, sweet and heavy, the way scents cling to someone trying to make an entrance. I sat at the dining table sorting through my notebook pages, pretending not to notice the two of them whispering near the front door. Their hushed tones weren't gentle, more like plotting between people who believed they deserved whatever they were reaching for. Derek strode in without a greeting and tossed a folder onto the table. Papers spilled out in a fan across the wood. "We're doing this now," he said. His girlfriend, Tasha, lingered by the counter, arms folded like a spectator settling in for a show. Her eyebrows lifted in a way that told me she already knew what was about to happen. I gathered the scattered pages and saw the familiar header: transfer of property, deed adjustment, emergency power of attorney. The same stack he'd pushed at me before, only now he'd brought an audience. "I told you I'm not signing anything," I replied, keeping my voice even. Derek snatched the papers from my hands. "You don't get it. This house is going to fall apart if you keep pretending you can manage it. Taxes, repairs, everything. I'm trying to make things easier for everyone." Tasha nodded as if he were preaching gospel. "He's right, Mr. Carter. You shouldn't be stressing yourself out," she chimed in. Her tone carried a hint of sympathy, but her eyes held something else. Expectation, maybe entitlement. I'd seen that look on strangers who assume an older man has already surrendered his authority. I pushed the papers across the table. "I'm managing just fine." Derek snorted. "You're not. You're out of touch. You keep making things harder. Just sign the damn forms." His palm hit the table, jolting the cup beside me. My nerves tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "I said no." Tasha shifted her weight, leaning closer to Derek. "Babe, maybe just explain it again. He seems confused." Confused. The word crawled under my skin. I looked at her fully for the first time. She was young, maybe late 20s, with an expression that suggested pity, but the kind that carries judgment beneath it. I wondered what Derek had told her. Probably the same story he'd been feeding the neighbours. Derek reached into the folder and held up the top sheet like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You sign this, things move forward. If you don't, you're putting yourself and everyone else at risk. I'm not asking anymore." There was no trace of shame in him, not even after everything we'd been through. Not after the slap, the rumours, the mail he hid. Only certainty, bold and unshaken. The certainty of someone who thinks he has already won. "I'm not handing over my home because you're impatient," I said. Tasha rolled her eyes. "This is ridiculous." Derek turned on me again. "You're treating me like the enemy. I'm your son. You should trust me." Trust. The word tasted bitter. He stepped closer, holding the pen out. "Sign it." I didn't move. His jaw tightened, and something inside him snapped. He grabbed the papers, shoved them back into the folder, and straightened to his full height. "Fine. If you're going to be stubborn, then you don't get access to things you can't handle." "I don't know what that means," I answered. Derek pointed toward the hallway. "From now on, stay out of the storage room and the basement, and don't go touching the mail. I'll handle that." Tasha watched with a slow, approving nod. He continued talking as though the house belonged to him and he was being generous enough to let me stay. "You're not messing with paperwork or accounts anymore," he added. "You get turned around too easily." I felt the shift, subtle but final. He wasn't making suggestions, He was setting rules. Rules for my life in my own home. The air around us tightened. My heartbeat didn't quicken, but something in my thoughts cooled. It wasn't fear or anger, just a clarity sinking in, layer by layer. "You don't decide what rooms I can use," I said. Derek scoffed. "Watch me." He walked to the hallway, opened the closet, and removed my set of spare keys. Then he shut the storage room door and locked it. The click of metal sliding into place carried more meaning than anything he'd said so far. When he turned back, the arrogance in his expression had hardened into certainty. "Things are changing. Get used to it." He handed the locked door a light knock, almost mocking the idea that I might challenge him. Tasha smirked softly, as if the whole thing amused her. I stayed where I was, not because I accepted anything he'd said, but because rushing toward him wouldn't undo the shift that had already occurred. The house felt smaller than ever as Derek pocketed the keys and walked back toward the kitchen. "I'm heading out," he announced to Tasha. "Let's go." She gave me a brief nod, one that wasn't polite or warm, just acknowledging the man she believed was losing control of his life. They walked out, still talking, voices fading until the door closed behind them. The quiet that returned wasn't peaceful. It pressed against me the way a too small coat squeezes the shoulders. I reached for the chair beside the table and eased into it. My hand moved across the wood, searching for steadiness. The folder still lay open, a paper corner sticking out as though it wanted to follow me. I pushed it aside, rose again, and walked down the hallway toward the locked door, stopping only a few inches from it. My fingers brushed the knob lightly, testing it. The lock held firm. I stood there for a long moment, the carpet soft under my feet, the air faintly carrying the scent of the detergent I'd used just 2 days before. It should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded me how quickly familiar places can shift under your feet. I turned away from the door and started down the hall again, each step measuring itself without hurry. I spent most of the next morning moving through the house quietly, opening drawers and closing them again without really looking for anything. The rooms felt different after Derek locked the storage area, as if each wall had shifted an inch inward while I slept. I checked the mailbox, even though Derek usually emptied it first. Nothing sat inside but a flyer, folded crooked. At least no envelope had been touched before I saw it. When I stepped back inside, my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but the name in the message pulled me still. "Ray, someone asked about your property file last week. Didn't sound like you. Careful. Miller." Attorney Miller had helped me file paperwork years ago when I refinanced the house. Good man, honest, didn't talk more than necessary. Seeing his name made my throat tighten. I typed back a simple reply, asking what exactly the person wanted. He responded with another short message. They asked about transfer options. Power of attorney had your last name. The phone stayed in my hand longer than it needed to. Derek must have contacted him. There was no other explanation. He didn't want my signature. He wanted a legal path around me. A knock at the door startled me. For a second, I thought Derek had returned early, but when I opened it, Lorraine stood there holding a small container of cornbread like it was an afterthought. "I was headed to choir practice," she said. "Thought I'd drop this off." I stepped aside to let her in. She walked to the kitchen without waiting for permission, the same way my wife used to do. That made something inside me settle. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said while setting the cornbread down. "I got enough." Lorraine gave me a look that said she didn't believe it. She pulled out a chair, gesturing for me to sit. "Ray, I've been thinking about Derek. Something came back to me the other night." She folded her hands, thumbs rubbing together slowly. "Years ago, after your wife passed, he asked me if grief ever gave folks excuses to take advantage of others." I blinked. "He was 16 then," she continued. "I told him grief doesn't erase right and wrong, and he said, 'Sometimes people let you do things when they're hurting.'" Her voice softened. "I didn't think much of it back then. Teenagers say strange things. But now, you might need to look at the bigger picture." The words sat heavy between us. I stared at a crack in the tabletop instead of meeting our eyes. Lorraine wasn't accusing him. She was reminding me of a pattern, one that had gone unnoticed or ignored because I kept giving him room to stumble, recover, stumble again. She stood after a moment. "I'm not here to tell you what to do, but trouble grows when silence feeds it." Then she left, and the kitchen felt larger and smaller at the same time. After she walked out, I reread Miller's message. The edges of truth were taking shape. Pieces I hadn't wanted to connect were beginning to line up. My hand shook once before I forced it still. By late afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with small pockets of conversation. I waved to a man washing his car, but he looked away too quickly. Another neighbor paused mid-step when I passed him on the sidewalk, offering a nod that didn't reach his eyes. Something had traveled through the street faster than I could trace. Derek had been talking. He'd built himself a story, maybe about me losing clarity, maybe about him needing to step in. He knew how to gather sympathy. He always had. Growing up, teachers said he had a natural charm. I saw it as confidence then. Now it felt like a tool used for shaping whatever narrative suited him. On my walk back, a woman tapped my arm. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right at home? Heard you've been having a hard time." The question hit like another slap, so gentle it almost hid the sting. I forced a smile and thanked her, then kept walking before my voice betrayed me. Inside the house, the air felt thick. Derek wasn't home yet, but his presence had stretched past the physical space. Each room carried the impression of someone rearranging life around me while pretending to help. I went to the living room and checked the camera I'd installed. Still working. That small, blinking light felt like the only witness I could trust. I straightened the stack of magazines on the side table, partly to keep my hands busy, and partly to make sure Derek wouldn't notice I'd been in the room adjusting things. The daylight dimmed slowly, and the house took on a quiet hum. I picked up my notebook again, flipping through the pages filled with dates and notes. A line suddenly stood out. "He controls the mail." Another beneath it. "He says I forget things." And then, neighbors repeating his words. I didn't want to imagine how he spun the story. Maybe he said I misplaced bills. Maybe he claimed I left the stove on. A small lie told convincingly can grow until people repeat it as fact. A heaviness edged into my chest, not fear exactly, more like realization building itself brick by brick. Derek wasn't simply impatient. He wasn't overwhelmed or misunderstood. He was constructing a world where my voice didn't count. I set the notebook aside and stood, stretching my back. My legs carried me toward the front door without planning the movement. A breeze slipped through a small gap where the frame never quite aligned right. I placed my palm against it to steady myself. A car slowed outside. Tires crackled over the gravel. Then the engine idled for a moment before fading down the street. I didn't turn away immediately. My hand stayed on the doorframe, fingers pressed lightly against the wood, feeling its slight vibration as another vehicle passed in the distance. The doorframe felt steady under my hand, so I let it hold me for a moment longer before stepping away. There was too much drifting around in my head to sit still, so I went to the spare desk in the corner of the dining room, the spot I used to use when I handled bills after work, all those years ago. The drawers still held old folders, some with frayed edges, others barely touched since my wife passed. I pulled them out one by one and spread them across the table. Sorting through documents used to bother me. Not today. My hands moved with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Old tax forms came first, then mortgage papers, then the blue binder holding the original deed. I laid them in neat stacks, checking signatures, dates, and notes. The process steadied me more than any deep breath. While flipping through a folder, I paused on my wife's handwriting. Her curly script labeling an envelope, water leak repairs, 2005. The ink tugged at something inside me, but I set the envelope aside too. Nostalgia couldn't help me now. I opened the small notebook where I'd been keeping track of everything Derek had done. Times, dates, comments, behavior. A log, really. Not the kind a father wants to keep about his son. I added a few lines about the neighbour who asked if I was managing all right. Then I wrote down Miller's message, word for word. After that, I powered up my old laptop. It took a while to start. Made a grinding sound like it wasn't sure it wanted to wake up, but eventually the screen flickered on. I searched through my emails and saved every message connected to the house, the insurance, the bank. Years of digital dust sat there, untouched. I downloaded copies to an external drive, one by one, making sure each file transferred properly before moving on. The camera footage came next. I brought up the app on my phone and watched the thumbnails load. No sound, just small snapshots of the living room through the day. Derek pacing, Derek taking calls, Derek tossing his coat aside, Derek staring at the front door like he expected someone to knock. Nothing dramatic, but the quiet aggression showed in every frame. How he moved through the house like it belonged to him alone. I copied everything onto the drive, organizing it in folders labeled with dates. My hands moved efficiently. I didn't shake. I didn't rush. Every movement felt precise, steady, purified by purpose. Once I finished, I tucked the external drive into the inner pocket of my coat. The weight of it grounded me. The sun had climbed high outside when I grabbed my keys. I chose the back exit instead of the front, not because I feared Derek, but because I didn't want him knowing where I was going. At the bottom of the porch steps, I checked the sidewalk in both directions. A man leaned against a car a few houses down, pretending to scroll through his phone. He looked up just once before returning his gaze to the screen. I'd never seen him before. That small detail didn't sit right. I turned and walked in the opposite direction. The law office was a 15-minute walk. I followed the quieter streets, letting my steps fall into a natural rhythm. When I reached the building, Miller's assistant greeted me with a surprised but warm nod. "Mr. Carter, you want to come in?" "I need to speak with him, if he's free." She led me to an office where the blinds stayed half closed and stacks of folders lined the shelves. Miller sat behind his desk, glasses perched on his nose. "Ray, I wondered if I'd hear from you." He motioned for me to sit. I did. "I got your messages," I said. "Wanted to know what exactly happened." He leaned back, hands crossing over his chest. "Young man called about a week ago, gave your last name, said he was checking on options for transferring a property owned by his elderly parent." He paused before continuing. "Didn't say you were unable to sign, but he hinted at memory issues and stress. Wanted to know if paperwork could move ahead without complications." My jaw tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "He asked for details on my file." Miller nodded. "Said he'd bring you in later. Wanted to see what was involved first." That was all I needed to hear. "Ray," he added, leaning forward, "if somebody's trying to maneuver around you, we need to make sure your documents are in order. Power of attorney, will, house deed, all that." "I've started gathering things." "Good. Bring everything next time. And maybe think about setting up a safety plan." I didn't want to ask what that meant. He explained anyway. "If you're pressured or threatened about your property, Adult Protective Services can intervene. Doesn't mean your son gets in trouble, just means someone checks the situation." I nodded slowly. He slid his card across the desk in case I needed him on short notice. After leaving the office, the afternoon air felt thicker. My feet took me toward the small park near the library, where I sometimes sat to clear my head. I chose a bench under a crooked tree and watched cars drift by. People hurried through their day, unaware that someone else's world had been quietly shifting off its axis. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "He's talking too much. Be careful. He's getting suspicious." No name. No hint of who sent it. A chill crept up my spine. Not the cold kind, but the kind that tells you someone's watching something they shouldn't be watching. I scanned the park briefly. No one looked at me directly. A man walked his dog near the fountain. A teenager scribbled in a notebook on the grass. Normal scenes, all of them. The message stayed open in my hand. I deleted it, but saved the number. On the way home, I noticed something else. A car slowed near the corner as I walked. The driver didn't look familiar, and he kept his eyes fixed ahead. But the way the vehicle eased forward made my instincts lift their guard. I changed my pace, turning down a side street. The car continued straight without hesitation. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. When I reached my block again, Derek's car sat in the driveway. My pulse didn't spike, but something inside me sank slightly. I wasn't ready for a conversation. Inside, he stood near the kitchen sink with his arms crossed. "Where were you?" he asked. I hung my coat on the rack. "Out." "Out where?" The question carried a tone he had no right to use. I had errands. His eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything before leaving. I thought you should check in with me. That sentence struck harder than anything he'd said earlier. I don't check in with you, I replied, my voice even. He stepped closer. I'm trying to help you, Dad. You've been acting strange. People are noticing. My breath stayed controlled. Who exactly? He lifted his chin slightly. Doesn't matter. Just stop sneaking around. The accusation rolled off him without shame. He moved past me into the living room, glancing at the bookshelf, maybe noticing something different, maybe not. His gaze lingered an extra second on the row where the camera rested among old photo frames. The moment stretched long enough for my stomach to tighten, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet and rinsed my hands, though they weren't dirty. The water ran over my fingers, grounding me, steadying my breath. The sound masked Derek's muttering in the living room. After drying my hands, I reached for a towel but paused halfway, my thoughts gathering, reshaping, preparing for whatever came next as the evening settled around us like a question waiting for an answer. Derek didn't wait long before escalating things. 2 days after the strange message on my phone, he invited several neighbors inside without asking me. I walked into the living room and found them gathered around the coffee table. 3 people from down the block and an older couple I barely recognized. Derek stood in the center, talking with the confidence of someone hosting a meeting he believed he controlled. "Dad, come here a second," he said, voice too loud, too bright. Every face turned toward me. Some wore polite smiles, others that careful expression folks use when they think something delicate is happening. Derek cleared his throat. "I've been worried about him," he announced. "He's not keeping up with bills, losing track of things. I think it's time we get some help and put protections in place." A murmur ran through the group. My pulse didn't spike, but the weight of their eyes pressed against my skin. He went on. "I've talked to a lawyer, and there are papers ready for him to sign. It'll give me the ability to manage the property so he doesn't get overwhelmed." One neighbor shook her head with sympathy that burned more than anger ever could. Someone else whispered, "Poor man." I looked at Derek. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He acted as though he'd done me a kindness by holding this little council in my home. "I don't need anyone to manage my life," I said. Derek raised a hand like he was calming a room. "You're misunderstanding. This is for safety. Responsibility falls on me if something happens to you." I stared at him, waiting for even the faintest sign of guilt. There was none. "You're telling these people I can't take care of myself?" I asked quietly. "You've been proving it, Dad," he said, "and these folks see it too." A round of pitiful nods followed. A memory hit me without warning. My wife, sitting at this same table years ago, telling me not to let grief trick me into carrying everything alone. I had promised her I'd stay steady for Derek. I had promised I'd be patient with him, even when he drifted through life with more needs than direction. That promise echoed now in a way that felt twisted. Derek held out a pen. "Sign, let's just get it done." My throat tightened as the room blurred around the edges, not from panic, but from something closer to disbelief. These people had no idea what they were participating in. They didn't see the steady stripping away of my autonomy. They just saw a narrative Derek had crafted for them, piece by piece. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. The older man in the corner stepped forward. "Son, sometimes it's best to let family help. No shame in it." Before I could respond, Derek clapped his hands once. "All right, everyone, thanks for coming. I just wanted support. You know how stubborn he gets." They filtered out with polite goodbyes. One woman patted my arm like she was comforting a confused child. The door shut behind them, and the house fell quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that settles. This one hovered, sharp and suffocating. Derek turned on me. "You embarrassed me." "You embarrassed yourself," I replied. He scoffed, walked into the dining room and grabbed his phone. "I'm done playing around." He dialed quickly, pacing. A few minutes later, he slammed the phone down on the counter. "Bank says the joint account is frozen until we clarify activity. I told them you might have been making mistakes with your transactions. They froze it to protect you." My stomach dropped. That account paid the utilities, groceries, everything. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "To force you to make reasonable decisions. You need someone handling this stuff." He didn't stop there. He picked up my cell phone from the counter, my own phone, and typed something before locking it. When he handed it back, the screen required a passcode I didn't know.
"You can get it back once we finish the paperwork," he said.
Every move was precise, calculated, like he had spent weeks preparing this moment. I sat down, not because my legs failed me, but because standing suddenly felt like too much. A deep ache opened somewhere inside, an ache that didn't come from loss, but from the realization that my son saw me as an obstacle, not a father. Derek kept talking, pacing the length of the kitchen, listing reasons why this had to happen. His voice faded on and off, each sentence hitting harder than the last. My mind drifted to memories, my wife's soft laugh, Derek's 7-year-old smile when we fixed his first bike, his teenage years when grief made him brittle, but still reachable. All of that felt distant now, like a life lived by someone else. Yet amid the pressure building around me, neighbours believing him, finances trapped, my own phone locked, something unexpected rose in its place. It didn't feel like rage or panic, more like a slow, grounded certainty forming beneath the turmoil. A calm unlike anything I'd felt in weeks. Clarity comes differently for older men, not as a flash, but as a settling, like dust drifting to the floor in the exact pattern it was always meant to take. My thoughts organized themselves without effort. Every threat Derek made fit into place, each action revealing a truth he never intended me to see. He wanted control, not safety, not responsibility. Control. Derek finally stopped pacing. "I'm going out," he said. "Think about what you want your last years to look like." He walked out, shutting the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stayed at the table, fingers resting lightly on its surface, letting the tremor inside me fade until only stillness remained. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, where the faintest hum from the camera system buzzed through the quiet. I rose a few minutes later and reached for the small folder of documents I'd organized the day before, my hand pausing just long enough for a single breath before lifting it. The folder felt heavier than it should as I carried it into the living room. I set it beside my notebook, then reached for my phone, still locked by Derek's new passcode. My fingers moved across the unfamiliar screen, trying combinations I thought he might use, but the device stayed shut. The blocked symbol blinked at me like a warning. So I switched to the one thing he hadn't managed to choke off, my small camera system. When I opened the footage on my laptop, the first few clips rolled by innocently enough. Derek pacing, Derek taking a call, Derek checking the mail that should have been handed to me. Then the thumbnail from that afternoon caught my eye. The moment captured in a single frozen frame. His arm mid-swing. My head turned slightly from the force. I clicked it open. No sound, but the movement said enough. Derek's anger, my stillness, his mouth shaping words that didn't need audio for me to remember. The corner of his girlfriend's jacket appeared on the edge of the frame, catching her watching, but not stepping in. I leaned back in my chair. You'd think seeing yourself being struck would ignite something. Shame, maybe, or fury. Instead, I felt a quiet settling inside me. A confirmation. Proof I wasn't imagining the shift in the house. Proof that what I felt wasn't the fog he kept insisting it was. As I copied the clip into a separate folder, an email notification popped up. I didn't recognize the sender at first, just a string of letters for a username. The subject line read, "About Derek." My hand hovered over the trackpad before clicking it. Inside was one short sentence. He's been talking about taking the house for months. Thought you should know before he makes a bigger mess. No signature, no hint of the sender, but I recognized the writing style. Tight phrasing, no wasted words. It belonged to a young man who used to run with Derek in his early 20s, a friend who drifted away once Derek's life started spiraling. We crossed paths enough times for me to remember how he spoke. The message matched him more than anyone else I could think of. Why he reached out now, I didn't know. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. Maybe he saw Derek slipping into something darker and wanted no part of it. People send warnings quietly when they feel they've already stayed silent too long. I stared at the message, the words locked into place, another piece fitting the puzzle I had been tiptoeing around. My eyes drifted back to the paused clip of the slap. His expression afterward, the coldness, the lack of hesitation, spoke louder than any explanation he'd offered. He believed he had already won. He believed the story he sold to the neighbors. He believed I would fold because he'd wrapped his manipulation in the language of care. The room around me felt still. Even the hum from the refrigerator seemed to have softened. I sat up straighter, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. He thought my silence was an agreement. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. I closed the laptop halfway, letting the screen dim. My breath slowed. A strange clarity, like the hush before a storm finally breaks its own tension, swept through me. The more I pieced together, the less weight the situation carried. Understanding lightens even the heaviest truths. The front door banged open. "You didn't answer your phone," Derek said, stepping in with quick, irritated strides. I didn't look up right away, which irritated him more. "Where were you earlier?" he asked. "You just disappear and expect me not to worry." I raised my head slowly. I had errands, I said. You can't just wander off like that, he snapped.
People think something's wrong with you, Dad.
His voice carried that false concern he'd been using so often. Soft on top, sharp underneath. I'm doing fine, I said. His jaw tightened. I've been doing everything I can to keep things in order. You should appreciate that. His words fell into the room like dropped stones. I watched him pace, hands moving in quick gestures as if he were lecturing a stubborn child. You're slipping. I've had to fix so many problems you don't even see. I shouldn't have to babysit my own father. He didn't notice the laptop beside me, didn't see the tiny blinking light on the shelf, didn't imagine for a second that the narrative he'd built was starting to crumble. I waited until he finished his rant. Derek, I said calmly, sit down. Why? He barked. Sit down. He didn't, but the firmness in my tone slowed him. He folded his arms, shifting his weight like he couldn't decide whether to stand or retreat. I know what you've been doing, I said. A flicker passed across his face, quick, almost invisible. He recovered fast. I've been helping. Someone has to. Is that what you call freezing my account? Locking my phone? He shrugged. You forced my hand. His confidence hadn't cracked. He kept his posture loose, casual, as though he believed every lie he'd told. I watched him carefully. The point wasn't to confront him, it was to observe him clearly, maybe for the first time since his mother died. The clarity kept growing, settling into each corner of my mind. You think I don't see what's going on? I asked. You're imagining things, he said quickly. You should rest, you're tired. His voice softened into faux concern, the same tone he'd used on the neighbors, the same tone he used to craft the illusion that he was the caretaker and I was the problem. He stepped closer. I'm just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly. This is hard on me too, you know. His hand reached for my arm. I didn't pull away. I didn't rise. I didn't raise my voice. A man doesn't need to shout when he finally sees the whole picture. I let him talk. Let him circle around his excuses, his justifications, his twisted explanations. Let him believe he was still in control of the conversation, still steering my future. While he talked, my mind moved quietly behind the scenes, placing the footage in one folder, the message from his old friend in another, the dates in my notebook forming a timeline no one could dismiss. He kept explaining himself until his voice blurred into background noise. Eventually he stopped, frustrated that I hadn't reacted the way he expected. You're not listening, he said. I am, I answered. More than you think. He stared at me for a moment, searching for the submission he believed he had earned. It wasn't there. His confusion flickered again. He muttered something I didn't catch and left the room. Footsteps thudding down the hallway toward his bedroom. The door clicked shut. I stayed seated, hand resting on the folder, the laptop still half open beside me. My pulse had settled. My breath had steadied. The weight pressing on me in earlier weeks had lifted in a quiet, deliberate way, leaving behind only purpose. He believed I would stay silent forever. He had no idea how wrong he was. I reached for the laptop and opened it fully again, the screen brightening as if the room itself leaned closer to watch what I would do next. I woke earlier than usual, long before the street outside stirred. The house held a stillness that made each breath sound louder than it should. I moved through the kitchen quietly, pulling out pans, eggs, sausage links, and the stack of biscuit dough I'd frozen the month before. My hands worked with a steadiness that felt almost foreign. Every motion had weight, but none of it shook. The skillet warmed on the stove while I mixed batter for pancakes. I hadn't cooked a spread like this in years, not since holidays when my wife was alive and Derek still laughed easily. The memory didn't hurt this time. It simply sat nearby, like someone observing but not interfering. As the sausage sizzled, I set the table with a care I hadn't shown it in months. Plates placed evenly, cloth napkins instead of paper, a pitcher of orange juice filled to the top. I even pulled out the jar of homemade jam that Lorraine had given me a while back. The routine calmed me, though I already knew none of this was about hospitality. I needed Derek to enter the morning believing I'd bent, believing he'd pushed hard enough that I had finally cracked. Manipulators read tone better than truth. If he sensed resistance too early, he might panic. He might hide evidence. He might shift the narrative again. I needed him at ease. I sat down with coffee once everything was ready. The clock ticked on the wall, marking each second with a patient tap. Somewhere down the hall, Derek's bedroom door creaked. His footsteps dragged a bit. He always walked like that when he thought he had the upper hand. He stepped into the kitchen, blinking at the sight of the full breakfast. "What's all this?" he asked. His tone carried suspicion, but a faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Just figured we could sit down together," I said. He scanned the table slowly before pulling out the chair across from me. His eyes darted from the biscuits to the bacon to the stack of pancakes. A soft grunt escaped him. Satisfaction, not gratitude. "Guess you finally realized I've been trying to help," he said. I didn't reply. Silence was safer. Silence made him confident. He mistook it for surrender. He started loading his plate, piling food high. I waited until he took his first bite before reaching for a biscuit. "I've got someone stopping by," he said casually. "Just a formality, won't take long." He wiped his mouth with a napkin, as if he were preparing for a meeting rather than a conversation with his father. "Who?" I asked. "Just someone to witness the paperwork you're going to sign today." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "We talked about this," I said. "I'm not..." He held up a hand. "You don't need to talk. You just need to do the right thing." The doorbell rang before I could answer. Derek stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "Stay put," he said, and walked toward the front door. I listened to the murmur of greeting, two voices, Derek's and the low voice belonging to a man I didn't know. Their footsteps approached. Derek returned with a tall man in a dark jacket carrying a clipboard. "Dad, this is Mr. Hollis. He's going to witness the signature," Derek said. The man gave me a nod but didn't smile. "I'm only here to observe, Mr. Carter, nothing more." He set his clipboard on the table, placing a pen neatly on top. Derek slid papers out of a folder with a confident flourish. "These are the same documents we talked about," he said. "It's time to stop fighting what's good for you. Sign at the bottom." He pushed the papers toward me. I glanced down. Transfer of property, durable power of attorney, financial oversight agreement, even a clause about appointing Derek as my primary caregiver. He'd planned everything. He leaned close. "Everyone already knows you need help. This just makes it official." The room felt thick, heavy with the smell of warm food and the arrogance radiating from him. He believed I had no moves left. He believed my world had shrunk to the size of his intentions. I reached slowly into my pocket. Derek smirked. There you go, being reasonable. But his smirk faltered when I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out my phone, the one I'd replaced the night before. I tapped the screen once, opened the camera folder, and turned the phone so both Derek and Mr. Hollis could see. The footage of the slap flickered to life, no sound, but the motion spoke loudly. Derek's hand striking my face, his posture towering over me, his lips forming threats that didn't need audio to be recognized. Mr. Hollis stiffened. Derek's eyes widened, then narrowed as anger chased confusion across his face. "What is this?" he snapped. "Proof," I said. I set the phone on the table and reached for the second device in my coat pocket. A small portable speaker, not for volume, just clarity. "You think one video means anything?" Derek asked, voice shaking now. "You don't understand how these things work." "There's more footage," I said. "And there's someone else coming." Before he could respond, another knock sounded at the door. This one wasn't gentle. Derek's jaw clenched. "Who the hell?" He stopped speaking when voices carried down the hall. "Adult Protective Services, we're here for Mr. Carter." His face drained of colour. Two representatives stepped inside. One woman with firm posture, one man holding a clipboard. Behind them came Miller, my lawyer, adjusting his glasses as he walked. Derek spun toward me. "You called them?" "I did," I said. APS approached the table. "Mr. Carter, we're here to follow up on a report of potential elder abuse. We understand there may be concerns about coercion and financial control." Derek barked a laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. "This is insane. He's confused. Someone put him up to this." But the woman cut him off. "Sir, we've received several pieces of evidence and statements. We need to review the situation fully." She gestured toward my phone, still playing the silent clip. "Is that from inside this home?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. Derek slammed his fist on the table. "You can't use that. He doesn't know how to work technology. Someone manipulated." "Sir, take a step back," the APS worker said firmly, his mouth opened and closed, rage knotting his face. He grabbed the papers he had pushed at me, crumpling them in one hand. "He's my father. I'm trying to protect him." "By freezing his bank account," Miller interjected. "By locking his phone. By attempting to gain power of attorney through pressure and misinformation." Mr. Hollis, the witness, stepped away from Derek. "I'm not part of this," he muttered. I didn't know what was going on. He edged toward the door like someone escaping a burning room. The APS workers separated themselves slightly from Derek, creating a small boundary he didn't cross. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the collapse of control. He looked at me with something almost wild in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "I'm your son." His voice cracked on the last word, as if he couldn't understand that his claim to that title didn't excuse anything. "And doing what I should have done a long time ago," I said softly. A quiet filled the room. Not peaceful, but dense, layered with the truth finally landing where it needed to. The APS agent turned toward me. "Mr. Carter, we'll need to speak with you privately. Can we sit somewhere else in the home?" I nodded. My chair scraped lightly as I stood. Derek didn't move to stop me. His hands hovered at his sides, opening and closing without purpose. I walked past him, carrying the folder and my phone, my steps measured, steady, grounded in a way they hadn't been for months. The APS workers followed me into the dining room, while Derek stayed frozen near the kitchen table, breathing hard, fists clenching and unclenching, like he was trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through his fingers. I didn't look back at him. My focus stayed on the agents as they pulled out their forms and asked if we could sit. I nodded and moved a few plates aside so they had space.
One of them opened a binder and began with basic questions. My age, medical history, financial responsibilities, whether anyone had pressured me to sign documents I didn't understand. I answered everything clearly. My voice didn't shake. My words didn't stumble. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to cushion or soften anything. Truth settled into me the way warm water settles into stiff joints. The agent wrote steadily. The second agent, taller, quieter, watched my face closely, as if gauging whether I was afraid. I wasn't. Not anymore. Mr. Carter, have you felt unsafe in your home? She asked. Not unsafe, I said, but unheard, dismissed, controlled. That's its own kind of danger. The quiet agent nodded. Being ignored doesn't make harm less real, sir. Through the doorway, I could see Derek pacing, his shadow moving back and forth. Every few steps, he muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch. His movements had lost their arrogance. Now they twitched with uncertainty. The taller agent asked if Derek had ever struck me. I didn't look toward the living room when I answered. Once. He asked if I had proof. Yes. I slid the phone across the table. He watched the footage carefully, replaying the moment where Derek slapped me, pausing when Derek's body shifted in that threatening way he tried to claim was nothing more than stress. The agents exchanged a glance that told me they'd seen enough cases like this to recognize a pattern. Thank you, Mr. Carter, the woman said gently. You did the right thing documenting this. The phrase didn't inflate me with pride. It simply settled inside, a quiet confirmation that I'd finally broken a cycle I should have ended long ago. They stepped into the living room next. Miller followed them. I stayed seated, listening as they spoke with Derek. His voice rose, angry and defensive, then fell into choppy explanations. More defensiveness, more denial. Nothing surprising. At one point he shouted, "You're taking his side because he's old." There was a pause. Then an agent replied, "We're taking the side of the facts." A few minutes later, the situation turned final. Derek marched back into view, face red and twisted with frustration. "They want me out of the house," he snapped, "for investigation. This is ridiculous." He grabbed his jacket, yanked it on, then pointed at me like he still thought he had power. "When this all clears up, you'll see how wrong you are." I didn't answer. His anger fizzled when it met silence. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. He realized no one in the room believed his version of events anymore, not even himself. He stormed out. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the taller agent turned to me. "We'll check in every few days. You can call us any time. And Mr. Carter, you handled this with dignity." The word dignity didn't sting or swell. It simply fit. When they left, I found myself alone in a house that suddenly felt bigger. Not because he was gone, but because the weight he brought with him had finally lifted. I walked to the hallway, touching the wall lightly as I passed. The same wall I'd leaned on when I felt dizzy after he froze the bank account. The same wall I steadied myself against after the slap. My hand didn't tremble now.
The afternoon slid into evening before I realized I hadn't eaten. I reheated a biscuit from the morning and ate it standing up in the kitchen, listening to the quiet like it was a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I slept deeply that night. When morning came, the house greeted me with a stillness that wasn't heavy anymore, a quiet that belonged to me. The locksmith arrived at 10, a young man with a calm demeanour and a respectful way of speaking. He removed the old locks and installed new ones without asking unnecessary questions.
"New start?" he asked casually. "Something like that." He worked on the deadbolt while I stood nearby, holding the small paper bag containing the old lock pieces. When he finished and handed me the new keys, their weight surprised me. Not because they were heavier, but because they represented something so simple and so long overdue. A door that answered only to me. When the locksmith left, I slipped the keys into my pocket and headed toward West End Park. The sun had climbed enough to warm the sidewalks. A few joggers passed, moving with the easy rhythm of people who hadn't had their lives upended recently. Walking has always helped me settle my thoughts. That day, each step felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. I found a bench under the big oak by the path. Kids played nearby. A man fed birds with leftover bread. 2 older women walked slowly, deep in conversation. Life continued, soft and steady, indifferent to what yesterday demanded of me. I drew in a breath, let it out slowly. Not a dramatic sigh, just an honest release. Grief, guilt, fear, responsibility, all the things I'd carried for Derek had sat on my shoulders so long I hadn't noticed the strain anymore. But with him gone, the absence felt spacious, like a room with windows finally opened. My wife would have had something wise to say here, something gentle but firm, something about how loving someone doesn't mean lying down while they walk over you. I stayed at the park for a while before heading home. My steps took me up the path, across the street, back toward my house with its new locks and quiet promise. Inside, the living room felt different. Not lighter exactly, just truer. Everything in place, nothing disturbed. The air carried no tension waiting to burst. I set the old lock pieces in a drawer, placed the new keys in a small ceramic dish by the door, and rested my hand for a moment on the door frame. No speeches, no wisdom spoken aloud, no dramatic conclusion, just a quiet breath filling my chest. Just the simple truth that the house was mine again. I walked toward the kitchen to make coffee, the soft sound of my steps moving through the space that finally moved with me, not against me.